Chapter 1. At 3 in the morning, the vidphone rang on the bed table of Rudolph Balkany, chief of the Bureau of Psychedelic Research. It rang for a long time before Balkany answered it, though, as so often of late, he had been awake for hours.
Yes, this is Balkany.
I want some information.
A worried voice on the other end of the line said. Balkany recognized the voice of the chairman of the United Nations Security Council.
I thought we could have a little talk.
Make it brief.
Balkany said.
I'm a sick man.
Did you hear the cast?
What cast?
He scratched his bearded chin.
The alien ultimatum. It came over all the TV and radio.
I don't waste my time with the mass entertainment media.
Balkany said.
What do they have to offer?
We bring you peace. We bring you unity.
Spare me the propaganda. I gather they demand the unconditional surrender of Earth.
That's right. But aren't you involved in developing some sort of new mind gadget, Doctor? Won't that stop them?
True.
Balkany said with a touch of irony.
But unfortunately, it will also stop us. It will, in fact, stop everything on or around this planet which happens to possess a mind.
I understand. You could render some people immune to it. Say, vital first-line leaders?
Not yet. The only defense against it would be the radical psychotherapy I'm working with. If you'd give me a little time and an ample supply of, shall we say, volunteers for my experiments.
We've got to have it now.
The chairman of the Security Council grated. With visible effort, he got control of himself. On the vid screen, his image became fixedly tranquil.
What do you advise?
I don't advise.
Balkany said.
I'm just the witch doctor in this tribe, not the chief. I make the little voodoo dolls, but it's your job to decide whether or not to stick the pins into them. However, I do have one favor to ask you.
What is that?
If you decide to use the thing, don't tell me. I don't want to know.
Having said that, Balkany hung up, rolled over, and continued trying to sleep.
Too unspecialized.
Mechas muttered, eyeing the captive human with distaste.
However, with a little selective breeding.
The timekeeper fluttered near Mechas's ear and said softly,
Better start to ready yourself for the meeting of the Grand Council.
Yes, of course.
Mechas said. His long, slender tongue whipped out and touched a push button next to his couch. At once his dressers came scampering in, twittering excitedly to each other. Mechas hunched himself up to make the task easier for them. He was, like all members of the Ganymedean ruling species, legless, armless, pink, and very much like a large worm in appearance. He did not need arms and legs of his own. The creatures constituted his arms and legs. This summed up their purpose in existing. It was for that they had been born, were bred. Now they busily slipped him into his finest red-orange formal sack. Nothing but the best for what might well be the most important day of his career in government service. Tiny grooms skittered over his head and set to work combing his extensive lashes, while washers, with their tongues, attended to his cheeks. During this, he glanced once more at the captive human.
Poor creatures.
He thought.
You should never have called our attention to your presence in the system.
Mechas had personally argued against the war, but now it had been accomplished.
Too late for tears.
He murmured aloud.
But it isn't so bad being a creature, is it, my friends?
No, it's all right,
Twittered the infinitely varied crowd of specialized beings that had gathered around him, making him ready.
First conquer, then occupy, then absorb. That's the way it's done. We've already gotten past the initial 2 phases without too much difficulty. Unless I'm wildly mistaken, today we pass into phase 3. And?
He thought.
That's where I come in.
To make absolutely certain, he called for his oracle. Serpent-like, the oracle approached.
What say you for the future?
Mechas demanded.
For today?
The precog said. Mechas noticed with uneasiness that the creature seemed unwilling to prophesy.
Yes, out with it!
The powers of darkness gather for you. It is the day of your enemies.
Mechas licked his lips and said,
But after that?
More darkness, and greater darkness, and finally, Oh, my good master, darkness for us all.
Mechas pondered this soberly. The oracle had advised against the invasion of Earth, hence Mechas's own opposition. But the invasion had been a success. There were those who doubted the power of the oracles,
Perhaps
he conjectured.
the future is unknowable after all. It's easy enough to utter vague and frightening words that nobody really understands and later on say, "You see, that's what I meant all along." These powers of darkness.
Mechas said aloud.
Is there anything I can do to evade them?
Today, nothing. But after that, a slim chance. If you solve the riddle of the Nowhere Girl.
The Nowhere Girl?
Mechas retained his composure only with great effort.
My faculty is limited and my vision is fading. But I see something approaching from the future where I find no words to describe. It has the manner of a vast cavity that reaches out to draw us in. Already it is so powerful that it bends the stream of time. The closer you get to it, the harder it will be to evade it. Oh, Master, I'm afraid. I, who have never been afraid before, am now eclipsed by terror.
Mechas thought.
There's nothing I could do to evade my misfortune today, so I might as well go forth and meet it without flinching or blanching. I can't control the fates, but I can control my reaction to them.
With a wave of his tongue, he summoned his carriers and started for the hall of the Grand Council. On the wall of the Grand Council Hall hung a great clock. All those who belonged to what one might call the progressive faction sat on the same side of the chamber as the clock. It was the clock faction that had pushed through the war against Earth. Those who sat on the side away from the clock comprised what one might call the conservatives. They had unsuccessfully opposed the war. It was to this faction that Mechas belonged. When Mechas manifested himself in the hall with customary pomp, he discovered no one reposing on the anti-clock side. Everyone in entering had gathered about the clock leaders. Mechas, lowered to the thick carpet by his carriers, remained inert, stunned. But he had already sworn a moral oath to himself. Painfully and steadily he made his way toward the traditional tooth-carved niche on the anti-clock side. There, alone, he took up the formal bent posture and eyed the senile idiots of the bench, and recalled, as he waited, that the expected darkness lay for him at tongue's end.
They won the war,
He thought to himself.
but that gives them the fulcrum to pry the dribbling electors into ratifying all their future connivances. I, however, will never give in, but I will not be the order giver. Only the order carry out her.
Seeing him present, the electors at the bench convened this most important session.
In your absence,
Came the thought from the mind group.
we initiated the distribution of Terran rulership. Your area awaits you naturally. You have not been ignored.
Mechas retorted with huge irony.
And what bale is left for me?
No doubt a worthless scrap of a bale, the dregs. He experienced through the union of the group mind the collective sardonic amusement of the common, directed at him. They enjoyed his frustration and impotence.
Name me that bale.
He said, and prepared to endure it, whatever it consisted of, however ignoble.
The bill,
The chief elector informed him gleefully.
arranged for your management, is the Bale of Tennessee.
Allow me to consult my reference material.
Mechas said, and by telepathic communication established contact with his librarian at his residence. A moment later, there visually appeared within his brain a full description, itemization, and map of the bale, and evaluation thereof. Mechas fainted, dead away. The next he knew, he lay supine in the general chamber of Major Cardinal Zenzi's residence. He had been transported to the home of his friend to recover his wits.
We tried to prepare you.
Zenzi said, coiled nearby solicitously.
A little splash of brigwater and lout, it'll clear your head.
The Nagdrals.
Mechas swore thickly.
Well, you'll live many more years, eventually.
A lifetime of work.
He managed to raise the fore portion of his body and steady himself.
I won't go. I'll resign from public service.
Then you can never again.
I don't want ever again to enter the common. I'll live out my life on a satellite, alone.
He felt rotten, as if he had been stepped on by one of the clumsy, enormous bipedal lower life forms.
Please, give me something to lap.
Presently, an obliging staff member of Zensi's domicile placed an ornate, chaste dish before him. He lapped dully, blindly, as Zensi watched him with concern.
There are,
He said presently,
unpacified Negroes in that bale, and hordes of Chippewa and Choctaw Indians holed up there in the mountains. It's the bunghole of the conquered realms, and they know it. And that's why they gave it to me. It's deliberate.
He hissed with wrath, totally ineffectual wrath.
More Brigwater!
He beckoned to a miserably inferior species of household servant. It approached.
Perhaps
Major Cardinal Zensi said tactfully.
it's a compliment. The one bale which requires genuine work. The sole area our military failed to neutralize. Now they've given up, turned it over to you. No one else wants to handle it. It's too tough.
At that, Mechas stirred. The idea, although it smacked of self-serving rationalization, roused him slightly. Had he thought of it himself, he would have been forced on ethical grounds to dismiss it. But Zensi, whom he respected, had advanced it. That took the onus from it. But even so, he did not want the task. If the military had failed, how could he succeed? Distortedly, he recalled news reports about the Neeg partisans in the mountains of Tennessee, their fanatical and skillful leader, Percy X, who had eluded all the homotropic destruct devices programmed with him in mind. He could imagine himself confronted by Percy X, in addition to the demand from the council that, as in all other bales, he carry out the customary program. Destroy the local structure of government and create an overall puppet monarch.
Tell them,
He said to the Major Cardinal.
that I'm sick. I swallowed too large a gork egg and it's stuck along my digestive tract somewhere. I'll be lucky if I don't burst. You know the way Saporgrib did last year when he consumed, 4 gork eggs at a single sitting? What a sight! Pieces of him turned up all over the dining room.
Memory warmed him, momentarily. Memory of a fine common mind get-together, a fusion for gaiety and pleasure, without the compulsion of duty emanating from the core of the polyencephalic mind, the electors of the bench and the powerful entities of the clock side of the hall.
Look at it this way.
The Major Cardinal said.
If you succeed, you'll make your military predecessor look like a fool. We'll make the whole military faction look like fools, in fact.
That's true.
Mechas said slowly. A plan had found its way into his mind. Tennessee was at present a hodgepodge of more or less autonomous feudal entities, each centered around some plantation owner or merchant prince, a condition which had resulted from the collapse of Earth's central government. It would be Mechas's task to select one of these tiny tyrants and elevate him to sovereignty over the entire Bale, above all his jealous compeers. No easy task that, no matter whom he picked, there would be objections, even hatred from the others. But what if he picked Percy X? Who else would be more grateful for the authority and thus more docile a puppet? Naturally, the merchant princes would cluck frantically, but they would no matter who was chosen. This way, perhaps, the Neegs and Indians could be pacified, and the rulership decided, all in one swift act.
That's true.
Mechas said again, this time with a note of hope in his voice. There was no longer any question of backing out. Certainly, the prophet on his staff had been right. There had lain something to be wary of directly in his path today, and he had squirmed directly into it, head on, as usual. And, as usual, he saw a solution, to his advantage.